Anti-deportation crackdown continued for the fourth consecutive day across the U.S., with Los Angeles being the epicenter of the police and protester showdown. Demonstrations are now spreading across the country. As protests escalate, President Donald Trump has doubled down on troop deployment. President Trump has ordered 2,000 more National Guards to be deployed to Los Angeles. Along with this, he has also called in 700 Marine personnel, often referred to as U.S. elite fighting forces. Trump says that his deployment of Marines and other soldiers to Los Angeles is preventing the city from burning to the ground. Earlier today, protesters and police came face to face in Santa Ana, southern Los Angeles, where sounds of flashbangs or firecrackers were heard exploding in the distance. Security forces dispersed protesters using rubber bullets and armored vehicles in downtown Los Angeles. These demonstrations had gathered outside a federal detention center in downtown where immigrants have been held. National Guard forces had formed a human barricade to keep people out of the building. Later, personnel moved up to the streets, starting to push people from the scene and firing, quote, less lethal munition, such as gas canisters. Earlier, protesters fired fireworks as they clashed with police. Others banged on the side of unmarked vehicles as they passed through police containment lines. There were even scenes of levity as some protesters danced to a band playing music from the truck on the street. On Sunday, the streets of Los Angeles were ablaze. Demonstrators took over streets in downtown Los Angeles, torching cars and looting stores in ugly scenes that saw law enforcement responding with tear gas and rubber bullets. This prompted President Donald Trump's order to deploy more federal forces. Immigration crackdown and following protests that began in Los Angeles first spread with the state of California to San Francisco and its capital, Sacramento. But now they are being reported from California to here in New York. In Texas, protests were reported in Dallas, Austin, Houston, and San Antonio. People also took to the streets in Philadelphia, Boston, and Chicago. These are the visuals from Texas, where protests were reported in two major cities of Dallas and Austin. Multiple people were detained after a street showdown with police officers. As tensions of the streets rise, California Governor Gavin Newsom came down heavy on U.S. President Donald Trump. Newsom slammed the move as deranged and un-American. In a social media post, Newsom wrote, U.S. Marines shouldn't be deployed on American soil, facing their own countrymen to fulfill the deranged fantasy of a dictatorial president. When asked earlier about Newsom's assertions that he wanted to start a civil war, President Donald Trump hit back at the governor.
You want a civil war on the streets of America?
No, that's just the opposite. I don't want a civil war. A civil war would happen if you left it to people like him. And I liked him. You know, I always got along with him. Never had a problem with him. But he's grossly incompetent.
This is the first time since the year 1965 that a U.S. president has sent National Guard troops to a U.S. city without a governor's approval. And the move has sparked a political tug of war between Democrats and Republicans. We are now being joined by Ray Locker, senior journalist, author, and columnist. Great to see you, Ray, and talk to you about this issue. President Trump says that Los Angeles will be burning to the ground if no troops were sent, but local authorities are against it. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think, this started with an unnecessary provocation by going into the Home Depot parking lots and arresting day laborers. And then it escalated quickly. The best way to solve this problem is get people off the streets, stop burning cars, wearing masks, causing problems. That's obviously fueling a lot of this. But I think it was precipitated by an unnecessary immigration crackdown that was meant to be a show of force. I don't think we need to have Marines on the streets of Los Angeles. I'm very familiar with that part of the city. The city is not going to burn down. Parts of it are obviously inflamed. I mean, I'm looking at the pictures on the screen. I was just in that neighborhood a few weeks ago. So I know what we're talking about here. I think tempers will cool down eventually. I hope that's what happens. because it doesn't need to get any worse than this.
Yeah, so true. President Trump calls them insurrectionists. I'd love to hear your assessment on that, first of all. And second of all, just a two-part question real quick while I have you. Law and order and immigration are actually two of Trump's campaign promises that most Americans are happy with, excluding the economy and the tariffs and all of those. So how do you see the political climate playing out in all of this and what we're watching, at least us in New York from far away?
You know, I think there are two things. One, the kind of abstraction of immigration. No one likes seeing illegal immigrants streaming across the border. People want that to stop. It's when you get to the specifics that people have a problem with. You know, you raid a nail salon, people are there just doing their jobs. They're not hurting anybody. Or, you know, people who are just working, you know, on a labor site somewhere and get whisked away by people wearing masks. People have a problem with that. They don't like the idea that you can just walk in this country and not be accountable, and they want that to stop. And by and large, that was stopping last year after Biden did his initial crackdown, and it's pretty much slowed to a trickle now. So now we're into a different phase that I think raises a lot of concerns. I don't know if you saw this story in the New York Times a couple weeks ago about this woman in a small town in Missouri who had a restaurant. She was an illegal immigrant, but she was part of the community. And by and large, the people in this community who mostly voted for Trump are like, why are you taking this woman away? So there's the general, the abstraction, and the specifics. And somehow they need to do a better job of getting to the specifics where you're like, this person is obviously a problem. Here's why. Here's why he was rounded up and being deported, as opposed to kind of a sweeping thing that people wonder why it's so violent.
Yeah, there's so many nuances when it comes to the issue of immigration. I absolutely agree. And how do you look at the difference between California Governor Gavin Newsom and President Donald Trump? I know you've heard time and again that the Democrats are looking for a leader. Is this his opportunity, or are we just seeing sort of this tug of war as we've always seen between the Democrats and Republicans when it comes to issues like these?
Well, obviously, California has a kind of a different attitude toward immigration. It's a majority minority state. No one ethnic group is the majority in California. Obviously, we've seen immigration fights played out there over the last 40 years. I mean, you used to vote by and large for Republicans, and that kind of broke in the mid-90s when you had, you know, Pete Wilson, the former governor, and others kind of saying, you know, we don't want as many immigrants in here. And as a result, a lot of Latinos trended toward the Democratic side. And so, you know, this is a continuation of politics we've seen over, you know, a long history. But, you know, I think the major issue is you start federalizing the National Guard and sending in U.S. troops when I don't believe they're necessary. That's where you cross into some difficult territory.
Great. Well, thank you so much for all of that. Ray Locher joining us on this news broadcast. I know we'll have a lot more to talk about as we follow this story closely. Great talking to you, Ray.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.